The lobby of Thompson Industries looked like something out of a movie. Marble floors stretched across the entire ground level, and glass windows rose 3 stories high, letting in the kind of natural light that made everything feel expensive. But the real centerpiece sat right in the middle of all that luxury, a massive grand piano, black and gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Victor Thompson, the 70-year-old founder of the company, decided to make his announcement. The occasion was special. Thompson Industries was celebrating 30 years in business, and Victor had invited everyone, from the top executives in their designer suits to the maintenance crew in their work uniforms. That's the kind of man Victor was. Eccentric, sure, but he believed everyone who kept his company running deserved to celebrate its success. The crowd gathered in the lobby, champagne glasses in hand, wondering what the old billionaire would say this time. Victor was known for his dramatic speeches and bizarre declarations. Last year, he'd announced he was giving every employee an extra week of paid vacation because his cat had lived to 20 years old. The year before that, he'd installed a meditation room on every floor because he'd read about it in a magazine on a flight to Tokyo. Now he stood by the piano, his silver hair perfectly combed, wearing a purple velvet jacket that probably cost more than most people's cars. He tapped a spoon against his glass and the room fell silent. 30 years, he began, his voice carrying across the lobby. 30 years of innovation, hard work, and building something meaningful. But you know what I've learned in all these years? Life is too short to be serious all the time. A few people chuckled. They had no idea what was coming. Victor walked over to the piano and rested his hand on it lovingly. This beautiful instrument has been sitting here for 5 years. My late wife, God rest her soul, was a pianist. She made me promise that wherever I worked, there would be music. So I bought this 1920s Steinway, and it's been the heart of this building ever since. The crowd murmured appreciation. Everyone knew Victor's wife had passed away from illness, and the piano was a tribute to her memory. But here's the thing, Victor continued, his eyes twinkling with mischief. This piano has been played by professionals at our holiday parties, by piano teachers I've hired, even by a concert pianist I flew in from Vienna. But you know what? None of them have truly moved me. None of them have made me feel what my wife made me feel when she played. He paused for dramatic effect, and people leaned in closer. So here's my challenge, my gift to the universe, if you will. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who can sit at this piano and play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 perfectly and with genuine emotion, I will marry them on the spot. The lobby erupted in laughter. People thought it was another one of Victor's jokes. Some of the executives clapped, enjoying the theatrics. A few younger employees took out their phones to record the moment. I'm serious. Victor raised his hands. I'll have my lawyers draw up a prenup that's very generous, I promise. But this isn't really about marriage. It's about finding someone who understands that music is the language of the soul. Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto is one of the most difficult pieces ever written. If you can play it, really play it, then you understand something deep about life, about struggle, about beauty. And that's the kind of person I want in my life. More laughter, more phone cameras. Someone in the back yelled, I can play chopsticks, which got a big laugh from the crowd. Victor smiled and nodded as if he expected this reaction. Mock me all you want. The offer stands. Play the piece, win my heart. He raised his glass. Now let's eat some cake. As the crowd dispersed toward the catering tables, the conversations turned to how funny the old billionaire was, how lonely he must be, how this was the most Victor Thompson thing anyone had ever heard. But in the back corner of the lobby, near the cleaning supply closet, someone wasn't laughing. Raymond Hayes stood with his rolling trash bin, wearing the dark blue uniform of the janitorial staff. At 52 years old, he'd learned to be invisible. That was the thing about being a night janitor. People looked through you, not at you. He was part of the background, like the potted plants or the fire extinguishers. Raymond had been emptying trash cans when Victor made his announcement. He'd frozen in place, his hands gripping the edge of the bin, his eyes fixed on that piano, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Those words hit him like a punch to the chest. He felt his heartbeat quicken, felt a tingling in his fingers that he hadn't felt in years. Around him, people laughed and chatted and moved toward the food, but Raymond couldn't move. He stared at the piano as if it were calling to him across the marble floor. A young woman from accounting walked past him to throw away a paper plate. She didn't even glance in his direction. To her, he was just the janitor. To everyone here, that's all he was. But Raymond knew something they didn't. He knew that piano. Not that specific instrument, but he knew pianos. He knew Rachmaninoff. He knew every note, every chord, every impossible passage of that concerto. He knew it because 20 years ago he'd played it. Raymond forced himself to look away from the piano. His hands were shaking slightly as he pushed his trash bin toward the service elevator. His shift didn't start for another 3 hours, but he'd come in early to help set up for the party. Now he needed to get away from this lobby, away from that piano, away from the memories that were suddenly flooding back. As he walked past the celebration, past the happy employees and the laughing executives, past the billionaire in his purple jacket, Raymond felt something crack open inside him, something he'd kept locked away for a very long time. He stepped into the service elevator and pressed the button for the basement. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of the piano through the crowd. It had been so long. So impossibly long, but his fingers remembered. God help him, his fingers still remembered. Every single note. Raymond's apartment was exactly what you'd expect from someone who worked as a night janitor, small, simple, the kind of place where everything had a purpose and nothing was there just for show. A single bed in the corner, a hot plate on a small counter, a table with one chair. The bathroom was so tiny you could wash your hands, brush your teeth, and touch the shower curtain all at the same time. But it was his. After everything that had happened, after all the years of running and hiding, this little studio apartment in Oakland was his safe place. He dropped his keys on the table and stood in the middle of the room, still feeling shaky from what had happened at work. That announcement. That piano. Those words that had dragged up a past he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. Raymond walked to the closet and pulled the door open. His work uniforms hung there. 3 identical sets of dark blue shirts and pants. A jacket for winter. 1 pair of good shoes he wore to the occasional family gathering. And in the back corner, pushed as far away as possible, a black case. He hadn't opened it in years. Hadn't even looked at it directly. But tonight, after hearing Victor Thompson's challenge, he found himself reaching for it. The case was heavier than he remembered. He set it on the bed and just stared at it for a moment, his heart pounding. Then slowly he clicked open the latches. Inside weren't clothes or tools. Inside was his past, carefully preserved like something in a museum. The first thing he pulled out was a photograph. Himself at 28 years old, sitting at a grand piano on a stage. He was wearing a tuxedo, looking confident and alive in a way that felt like a stranger now. The photo was from a concert in New York, at one of those famous halls where every note echoed like it mattered to the whole world. There were more photographs. Him shaking hands with conductors. Him taking a bow while an audience stood and applauded. Him holding flowers that fans had thrown onto the stage. In every picture, he looked happy. Completely, genuinely happy. Raymond set those photos aside and found the newspaper clippings. His hands trembled as he unfolded them. The paper had yellowed with age, but the headlines were still clear. Piano prodigy Raymond Hayes stuns Carnegie Hall audience. 25-year-old Hayes called, once-in-a-generation talent. Juilliard graduate makes triumphant debut. He'd kept them all, even though looking at them hurt. Even though they reminded him of everything he'd lost. There was another photograph, and this one made him stop breathing for a moment. A woman with kind eyes and a bright smile, holding a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. His wife Linda, his daughter Sophie, both of them looking at the camera like they had forever ahead of them. Raymond sat down on the bed holding that photograph and let himself remember what he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. He'd been on tour in Europe when it happened, playing concerts in London, Paris, Berlin, living the dream that every classical pianist hopes for. The plan was simple: finish the tour, come home, spend the summer with his family. Linda had been so proud of him. Sophie was too young to really understand what Daddy did, but she loved to dance when he played at home. The call came at 3 in the morning in his hotel room in Vienna. A car accident. A drunk driver running a red light. Linda had died instantly. Sophie had held on for 2 hours at the hospital, but she was too small, too fragile. By the time Raymond could get on a plane, they were both gone. He'd flown home in a fog, arranged funerals he couldn't remember, accepted condolences from people whose faces he couldn't see. And then, 3 weeks later, his manager had asked if he was ready to finish the tour. There were contracts, obligations, people who had bought tickets. Raymond had said yes because he didn't know what else to do. He'd gotten back on stage in Boston, in front of 2,000 people, ready to play the same Rachmaninoff concerto that Victor had mentioned today. But when he sat down at that piano and put his fingers on the keys, something broke inside him. He couldn't do it. Couldn't play the music he'd been playing while his family died. Couldn't pretend that any of this mattered anymore. He'd stood up, walked off the stage, and never came back. The music world tried to find him. His manager called hundreds of times. Fellow musicians reached out. There were even articles wondering what had happened to the promising young pianist who'd vanished. But Raymond had disappeared completely. He'd left New York, left his apartment, left his entire life behind. For years he'd drifted, working construction in Chicago, washing dishes in Seattle, picking up whatever job would let him be alone with his grief. Eventually he'd landed in San Francisco and found work as a night janitor. It was perfect. He worked when everyone else slept. He cleaned and emptied trash and mopped floors, and nobody asked him about his past or his dreams or why someone with his education was pushing a mop. The piano became his enemy. Every time he saw one, whether in a mall or a hotel lobby or a church, he'd feel that same crushing weight. The instrument he'd loved more than anything had been playing while his family died. How could he ever touch one again? But tonight, hearing Victor's challenge, something had shifted. For the first time in 15 years, when Raymond thought about that piano, he didn't just feel pain. He felt something else too, something he couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or longing, or maybe just the faintest whisper of the person he used to be, still alive somewhere deep inside. Raymond carefully put the photographs and clippings back in the case. He closed it and returned it to the closet, but this time he didn't push it all the way to the back. He lay down on his bed and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Could he even still play? It had been 15 years. His fingers were calloused now from work, not from piano keys. His back hurt from mopping floors. He was 52 years old, not 28, but the music was still there. He could feel it. When he closed his eyes, he could hear every note of that Rachmaninoff concerto. His fingers twitched slightly, remembering the patterns, the reaches, the impossible passages that had once been second nature. Raymond didn't sleep that night. He lay awake until dawn, fighting a battle with himself. Part of him wanted to forget he'd ever heard Victor's challenge, to go back to being invisible, safe in his small life. But another part of him, a part he'd thought was dead, was waking up. And it was asking a question he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. What if he could play again? What if, after all these years, he could face that piano one more time? 3 days passed after Victor's announcement, and Raymond couldn't stop thinking about that piano. It was like a song stuck in his head that wouldn't leave. He'd be mopping a floor and suddenly find himself remembering a specific passage from the Rachmaninoff concerto. He'd be emptying trash cans and his fingers would twitch, moving through the motions of chords he hadn't played in 15 years. It was driving him crazy. On Friday night, Raymond arrived at work 2 hours early. He told himself it was because he wanted to get a head start on his tasks. But that was a lie, and he knew it. He wanted to see the piano when the building was empty. The lobby was quiet at 10 p.m. The daytime workers had all gone home. The only sounds were the hum of the air conditioning and the distant buzz of the fluorescent lights in the hallways. Raymond pushed his cleaning cart across the marble floor, but his eyes were fixed on the grand piano in the center of the room. He walked closer, his heart beating faster with each step. When he reached it, he stopped and just stood there staring at the keys. They were ivory and ebony, perfectly maintained, gleaming under the chandelier lights. His hands hung at his sides and he could feel them trembling. Just touch it, he thought. Just one key. That's all, but he couldn't. His body wouldn't let him move. It was like there was an invisible wall between him and the instrument. 15 years of avoiding pianos, of walking past music stores with his eyes down, of changing the channel when classical music came on the radio. All of that was holding him back. You okay? Raymond jumped and spun around. A young woman in a security guard uniform stood a few feet away, looking concerned. Her name tag said Christina, and she couldn't have been more than 23 or 24 years old. Raymond had seen her around but never really talked to her. I'm fine, he said quickly, stepping away from the piano. Just cleaning, Christina smiled. You weren't cleaning. You were staring at that piano like it owed you money. Raymond felt his face get hot. I was just looking. Do you play? She asked, walking closer. Her shift had probably just started. She carried a cup of coffee and had her radio clipped to her belt. I used to, Raymond said quietly. A long time ago. How long? 15 years, Christina whistled low. That's a serious break. What happened? Did piano hurt your feelings? Despite himself, Raymond almost smiled. Something like that. They stood there in silence for a moment. Christina sipped her coffee and looked at the piano, then back at Raymond. You know what I think? I think if you haven't touched a piano in 15 years and you're standing here staring at one at 10 o'clock at night, then maybe it's time to sit down and play something. It's not that simple, Raymond said. Why not? The piano's right there. The building's empty. Nobody's going to judge you. She set her coffee down on a nearby table. Look, I don't know what happened to you and you don't have to tell me. But I see you every night. You're the nicest person in this whole building. You leave little notes on people's desks when they're stressed. You water the plants on every floor. Last week I saw you fix that broken chair in the break room even though that's not your job. Raymond didn't know what to say. He hadn't realized anyone noticed the things he did. My point is, Christina continued, you take care of everyone else. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself. If playing piano is something you used to love, then why are you punishing yourself by not doing it? Her words hit him harder than he expected. Why was he punishing himself? Because Linda and Sophie had died? Because he'd been playing piano when it happened? Because somehow in his grief-broken mind, he'd connected music with loss? I don't know if I even remember how, Raymond said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then find out, Christina said simply. She picked up her coffee. I've got to do my rounds, but I'll be back in about an hour. If you're still standing here staring at it, I'm going to think you're a statue. She gave him a friendly smile and walked away, her boots echoing across the marble floor. Raymond stood alone in the lobby again. Christina's words echoed in his mind. Take care of yourself. Why are you punishing yourself? He looked down at his hands. They were rough now, scarred and calloused from years of manual labor. These weren't the hands of a pianist anymore. But when he flexed his fingers, the muscle memory was still there. He could still feel it, the way his hands used to spread across the keys, the way his fingers used to dance through complicated passages. Before he could talk himself out of it, Raymond sat down on the piano bench. The leather was cool and smooth. His feet found the pedals like they'd never left. His hands hovered over the keys, shaking so badly he had to take a deep breath to steady them. Just one note, he told himself. Just press one key and see what happens. He pressed middle C with his right index finger. The note rang out clear and pure in the empty lobby. It sounded like hope, like a door opening after being locked for years. Raymond pressed another note, then another. His left hand joined his right. Before he knew what he was doing, he was playing a simple scale. C major up and down, the first thing any piano student learns. It sounded terrible. His timing was off. His fingers stumbled. He hit wrong notes. But he was playing. After 15 years of silence, his hands were on a piano again. Tears started running down his face, but he didn't stop. He moved into a simple piece, something he'd learned as a child. His fingers remembered more than his mind did. They found the patterns, the rhythms, even when he made mistakes. He played for maybe 5 minutes before he had to stop. His hands were cramping, his emotions were overwhelming, and he felt like he'd just run a marathon. But something inside him had broken open. Not broken in a bad way, broken the way a dam breaks, releasing water that's been held back too long. Raymond sat there at the piano, breathing hard, tears still wet on his face. He felt exhausted and alive at the same time, terrified and excited. It hurt, but it was a good hurt, like stretching a muscle that hasn't been used in years. He heard footsteps and looked up. Christina was coming back from her rounds earlier than she'd said. She stopped when she saw his face and didn't say anything at first. You played, she said finally. Raymond nodded, not trusting his voice. How did it feel? Like coming home, he whispered. Like coming home after a very, very long trip. Christina smiled. Good, now comes the hard part. What's that? You've got to come back tomorrow and do it again. And the day after that, and the day after that. She picked up her coffee cup. If you're serious about that old man's challenge, you've got a lot of practicing to do. Rachmaninoff doesn't play itself. After she left, Raymond sat at the piano for a few more minutes. His hands rested on the keys, no longer shaking. He thought about what Christina had said. Come back tomorrow. And the next day, and the next. Could he really do this? Could he really prepare to play one of the most difficult pieces ever written? After 15 years away from music, Raymond looked around the empty lobby. Nobody was here to see him succeed or fail. Nobody was here to judge. It was just him and the piano and the quiet night. Maybe that was exactly what he needed. He stood up from the bench and got back to his cleaning cart. He had work to do, but now he had something else too. A reason to come in early every night, a goal, a purpose beyond just surviving. For the first time in 15 years, Raymond Hayes felt like he might have a future worth looking forward to. Raymond started coming to work 3 hours early every night. He'd arrive at the building at 8 p.m., when the last of the day shift workers were heading home, and he'd wait in the parking garage until the lobby cleared out. By 9, the building was quiet enough for him to practice. The first week was brutal. His fingers felt like they belonged to someone else. They were stiff and clumsy, stumbling over passages that used to flow like water. The Rachmaninoff concerto was a monster. 48 minutes of music that demanded perfect technique, incredible stamina, and emotional depth that couldn't be faked. After 15 years away from the piano, trying to play it felt like trying to climb a mountain with broken legs. Raymond's hands ached constantly. His fingers developed blisters that turned into calluses. Some nights he could only practice for 20 minutes before the pain became too much. He'd sit on the piano bench, hands throbbing, wondering if he was being ridiculous. A 52-year-old janitor thinking he could play one of the hardest pieces ever written. Who was he kidding? But every night he came back, and slowly, painfully, things started to improve. By the second week, his fingers remembered more than his conscious mind did. They found the patterns, the reaches, the way his left hand had to stretch while his right hand danced across the high keys. The muscle memory was buried deep, but it was still there, waiting to be uncovered. Christina checked on him every night during her rounds. She'd bring him water and tell him how it sounded. At first she was honest in a kind way. Better than last night, she'd say, even when it really wasn't. But after 2 weeks she started saying things like, okay, that part gave me chills, or I actually understood what you were trying to make me feel in that section. Raymond wasn't the only one who noticed his practicing. The night crew started to figure out what was happening. There was Felipe, one of the other janitors who cleaned the upper floors. He was in his 60s, from Mexico, and had worked at the building for 20 years. One night he came down to the lobby and stood listening for a while. When Raymond took a break, Felipe walked over. I didn't know you played piano, Felipe said. I didn't think I still could, Raymond admitted. Felipe nodded slowly. My father was a musician back in Guadalajara. He played guitar. He always said that music doesn't leave you, even when you leave it. I think he was right. After that, Felipe started timing his break to coincide with Raymond's practice. He'd sit on one of the lobby couches with his thermos of coffee and just listen. He never said much, but his presence was comforting. It reminded Raymond that he wasn't completely alone in this crazy thing he was attempting. Then there was Diane, who worked the front desk during the day but sometimes stayed late to finish paperwork. She was a grandmother, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, the kind of person who seemed to know everything that happened in the building. One evening she was working late when Raymond started practicing. He saw her and almost stopped, but she waved at him to continue. When he finished the section he was working on, she came over to the piano. How long have you been doing this? She asked. About 3 weeks now, Raymond said. You're going for Victor's challenge, aren't you? The marriage proposal thing? Raymond felt embarrassed. I don't care about the marriage part. I need to know if I can still do this. Diane studied him for a moment. I've worked here for 12 years. I've seen a lot of people come through this building. Most of them spend their whole lives playing it safe, doing what's expected, never taking risks, and then they wonder why they feel empty. She smiled. Whatever your reason for doing this, I think it's brave. Keep going. Word spread quietly among the night shift workers, the cleaning staff, the security team, the IT guys who worked late fixing servers. They all knew about Raymond and his secret practice sessions. And something beautiful happened. They became his protectors. When a late working executive would head toward the lobby, someone would intercept them with a question or a problem that needed attention elsewhere. When the building's automated lights would start to dim, someone from IT would reset them. When Raymond practiced past midnight, Felipe would cover his janitorial duties so he wouldn't fall behind on his work. It became their secret. Their own quiet rebellion against the way things were supposed to be. Nobody told the day shift workers. Nobody told management. This was something that belonged to the people who kept the building running while everyone else slept. By the fourth week, Raymond could play through the entire first movement of the concerto without stopping. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was recognizable. The notes were there. The timing was mostly right. And sometimes, for brief moments, he could feel the emotion of the music coming through his fingers. Those moments were what kept him going. When everything clicked and the piano wasn't just an instrument anymore, but an extension of his own heart, expressing things he couldn't put into words. In those moments, he felt like himself again, not the grieving man who'd run away from his life, not the invisible janitor, but Raymond Hayes, the person he'd been before tragedy broke him. Christina noticed the change too. One night after he'd played particularly well, she sat down next to him on the piano bench. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why now?" "That old man made his announcement weeks ago, and the piano's been sitting here for 5 years. What made you finally decide to play again?" Raymond thought about it. "I think I needed to hear someone else say it was possible. When Victor talked about finding someone who understood that music is the language of the soul, something woke up inside me. Like he was speaking directly to me even though he had no idea I existed. And now I remember why I loved this. Not the fame or the applause or any of that. I loved making something beautiful. I loved taking these 88 keys and turning them into emotion, into stories, into something that could make people feel." He looked at his hands. "I lost that when I lost my family. I thought the music died with them. But maybe it was just sleeping." Christina was quiet for a moment. "My mom died 2 years ago," she said finally. "Cancer. She used to love baking. Made the best chocolate cake you've ever tasted. After she died, I couldn't even look at cake. Couldn't smell chocolate without crying. But about 6 months ago, I tried making her recipe. I cried the whole time and the cake came out terrible, but I felt closer to her than I had since she passed." She stood up. "I guess what I'm saying is maybe the things we love don't die when the people we love die. Maybe those things are how we keep them alive." After Christina left, Raymond sat at the piano for a long time, thinking about her words. Linda had loved listening to him practice. She'd curl up on the couch with a book and just let the music wash over her. Sophie used to dance in circles, making up her own interpretations of whatever he played. If he played now in a way, he was playing for them. Not because they could hear it, but because music had been part of how they loved each other. Walking away from the piano hadn't honored their memory. It had buried it. Raymond placed his hands on the keys and began the second movement of the concerto. This was the slow, beautiful part. The part that broke your heart if it was played right. His fingers moved across the keys and he didn't think about technique or accuracy. He just thought about Linda's smile, about Sophie's laugh, about love and loss and the way beauty and sadness could exist in the same moment. When he finished, his face was wet with tears, but he was smiling. Felipe, who'd been listening from his usual spot on the couch, stood up and clapped slowly. "Your father would be proud," Raymond called over to him. "I think so," Felipe said. "And I think whoever you're playing for, they would be proud too." Raymond wiped his eyes and looked at the piano. He still had work to do. The third movement was the hardest, fast, technical, demanding. He wasn't ready for it yet, but he would be. For the first time in 15 years, Raymond Hayes believed in himself again. 3 months after Victor made his challenge, Raymond could play the entire concerto from beginning to end. It wasn't flawless. There were still passages that gave him trouble, moments where his fingers couldn't quite keep up with what his brain remembered. But it was real. It was music. And on his best nights, it was even beautiful. He never planned to actually perform for Victor. That wasn't the point. The point had been proving to himself that he could still do this, that the part of him that loved music wasn't dead. Every night when he played, he felt more whole, more like the person he used to be, but wiser now, scarred but healing. It was a Thursday night, 3 months and 2 weeks after everything started, when fate made the decision for him. Raymond arrived at 8 p.m. as usual. He noticed Victor's reserved parking spot was empty. which was normal. The old billionaire rarely stayed late. Raymond waited for the building to clear, then made his way to the lobby with his cleaning cart. Christina was already on duty, and she gave him a thumbs up as she headed out on her first round. He sat down at the piano and began his warm-up exercises. His fingers felt good tonight, loose and ready. He started with scales, then moved into some simpler pieces to get his mind focused. Finally, around 9:30, he began the Rachmaninoff concerto. He played the first movement with his eyes closed, letting the music flow through him, the fast, dramatic opening that always made his heart race. Then the second movement, slow and achingly beautiful, where he thought about Linda and Sophie and let himself feel the grief without being destroyed by it. And finally, the third movement, the technical showcase that had taken him weeks to relearn, with its impossible runs and dramatic crescendos. Raymond was so lost in the music that he didn't hear the elevator ding, didn't hear the footsteps crossing the marble floor, didn't notice anything at all until he played the final chord and the sound faded into silence. Then he heard it. A single person clapping. Raymond's eyes flew open and he spun around on the bench. Victor Thompson stood about 20 feet away, tears streaming down his weathered face. He was wearing casual clothes, jeans and a cardigan, looking more like someone's grandfather than a billionaire. In his hand was a briefcase, like he'd come back to pick up work he'd forgotten. "Who are you?" Victor asked, his voice barely a whisper. Raymond stood up quickly, his heart hammering. "I'm sorry. I'm one of the janitors. I didn't mean to." No, Victor interrupted, walking closer. "I'm not upset. I don't even know what I am." He stopped and wiped his eyes. "I've been listening for the last 20 minutes. I came back for some documents and I heard the music and I couldn't move. I stood by the elevator and listened." Raymond didn't know what to say. His mind was racing, trying to figure out if he was in trouble, if he'd broken some rule he didn't know about. "How long have you been playing?" Victor asked. "Most of my life," Raymond said quietly, "but I stopped 15 years ago. I only started again after you made your announcement." "Why did you stop?" And there it was. The question Raymond had been asking himself for 3 months. He took a deep breath and told Victor everything. About being a concert pianist. About Linda and Sophie. About the accident and the grief and walking away from music because it hurt too much. About spending 15 years invisible, running from the person he used to be. Victor listened without interrupting, and when Raymond finished, the old man walked over to one of the lobby couches and sat down heavily, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "My wife's name was Catherine," Victor said. "She died 5 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought it for 3 years, and I watched her get smaller and weaker. And there was nothing I could do, nothing my money could fix." He looked up at Raymond. "She was a pianist, like I said. Not professionally, but she played every day. When she got too sick to play anymore, that's when I knew we were really losing her." Raymond sat down on the couch next to him. "After she died," Victor continued, "I bought that piano and put it right there. I told myself it was a tribute to her. But really, I was hoping I'd find someone who could play the way she played. Not technically perfect, but with soul, with real emotion." He laughed softly. "So I made that ridiculous announcement about marriage. Everyone thought it was a joke. Maybe it was. But I was serious about finding someone who understood what music really means." "It means everything," Raymond said. "And nothing. It's the most important thing in the world until something more important comes along. And then if you're lucky, you find your way back to it." Victor nodded. "You know what I heard when you were playing? I heard someone who understands loss, who knows what it means to keep going even when you don't want to. That second movement, the slow part, you didn't play it like someone showing off technique. You played it like someone who's lived through something terrible and came out the other side." They sat in silence for a moment. Two men who'd both loved and lost, who'd both found their way to this exact moment in an empty lobby at night. "I'm not going to marry you," Victor said finally, and both of them laughed. "But I do want to make you an offer. How would you feel about teaching?" Raymond looked at him confused. "Teaching? I've been thinking about starting a music program for kids who can't afford lessons, who wouldn't otherwise get the chance to learn. Kids from rough neighborhoods, foster care, families struggling to get by. I have the money to fund it, but I need someone to run it. Someone who knows music, yes, but more importantly, someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and find your way back." Raymond felt his throat get tight. I haven't taught in 15 years. I'm not sure I'd be any good at it. 3 months ago you hadn't played in 15 years, Victor pointed out. Look at you now. Besides, I'm not looking for someone who's good at following rules and curriculum. I'm looking for someone who can show kids that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being human. Before Raymond could respond, the elevator dinged again and Christina stepped out, followed by Felipe and Diane. They froze when they saw Raymond and Victor sitting together. It's okay, Raymond called to them. Everything's fine. Christina walked over slowly. We heard you playing and then it stopped and we got worried. You knew about this? Victor asked, looking at his nightstaff with new appreciation. We all knew, Felipe said, coming to stand with the group. We've been helping him practice, making sure nobody bothered him. Victor looked around at these people. The janitor, the security guard, the cleaning supervisor, the front desk worker. People he passed every day without really seeing. You've all been covering for him? Diane stepped forward. He wasn't hurting anyone, and watching him work this hard, seeing him change over these months, it reminded us that it's never too late to try again, whatever it is for each of us. Victor stood up, and suddenly he wasn't just the eccentric billionaire anymore. He was something more, someone who recognized that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought. I need to expand my offer, he said. This music program I'm starting, I can't do it alone. I need all of you. People who understand what it means to work hard, who know how to support each other, who can show kids that success isn't about where you start, but about whether you keep going. Raymond looked at his friends, because that's what they'd become over these months. Christina with her coffee and her kind words, Felipe with his quiet presence, Diane with her sharp wisdom. They'd all been part of his journey back to music. Back to himself. I need to think about it, Raymond said finally. This is a lot to take in. Take all the time you need, Victor said. But Raymond, thank you. You gave me something tonight I didn't think I'd ever have again. You reminded me why Catherine loved music so much, not because it's pretty or impressive, but because it's the closest thing we have to magic. It takes pain and turns it into beauty. It takes silence and fills it with meaning. After Victor left, Raymond and his friends stood in the lobby, still processing what had happened. Christina broke the silence first. So, she said, grinning, does this mean you're going to stop being a janitor? Raymond looked at the piano, then at the people around him. I don't know what I'm going to do, but for the first time in 15 years, I'm excited to find out. He sat back down at the piano and started playing something light and joyful. Not Rachmaninoff, but a simple melody that made everyone smile. Felipe started humming along. Diane swayed slightly to the rhythm. Christina pulled out her phone and recorded a few seconds, then put it away, wanting to just experience the moment. The music filled the empty lobby, and for once it wasn't about perfection or performance or proving anything. It was just about being alive, being together, and being brave enough to start again. Raymond played until his hands got tired, and when he finally stopped, he realized he was exactly where he needed to be. Not because of Victor's offer or because he'd conquered his demons, but because somewhere along the way, while learning to play piano again, he'd learned something more important. He'd learned how to forgive himself, how to honor the past without being trapped by it, how to let people help him, and how to let music be joyful again instead of just painful. The janitor who walked off a stage 15 years ago had finally found his way back home. Not to concerts or fame or recognition, but to something better, to purpose, to community, and to the simple, profound gift of doing what he loved with people who cared. And that was worth more than any challenge, any marriage proposal, or any amount of money in the world.